The first question is about, under our theme, mission and older people, is about the words older people. I want you to tell us, Ian, from your particular perspective and role, what this description means to you.
For me as a parish minister in this area, older people, well, it's very difficult to put a definition on age of an older person. One used to think of a retired age, you're older if you've retired, but now of course we don't know when people retire. Also, people will have responsibilities well into their old age, as it were, for grandchildren and looking after children, etc. So it's a very mixed bag when you say an older person, where all of that, as Sandra said, that is us. My younger children would call me old when I was only in my mid-30s, so what is an older person? From parish ministry perspective, my congregation is probably typical of the average parish in Glasgow. I believe the average person who is a worshipping person in Glasgow, and it was a survey last year, is 62 years of age. So my congregation, very typical of that, older people keep the church going. They are the experience, they are the commitment, they have the time perhaps. But increasingly an older person to me is perhaps somebody not only with increasing responsibilities and demands, but perhaps decreasing stamina and ability and physical abilities. And so we've got people who are keeping our congregations going, but there are also people with increasing need. Many people with dementia or memory loss, great need, increasingly a need for care in the community where churches like ours are trying to address. And so there's a whole spectrum. When you say older people, it's us, it's life, and it's a rich tapestry which we enjoy being part of, and it's a responsibility, as Leviticus tells us, to look after the elderly. Who are the elderly? Good question.
From your perspective and role, what does mission mean when you put it alongside the words older people? Would you like to launch us on in that?
Well, yes. As a parish ministry here, ours is very much a residential area, and I would suspect very well placed to support the folks in that. Our mission, of course, is the same as every other parish church, that to take Christ into the parish and to take Christ beyond the parish. And that means, for us, being good neighbours to the folks round about us. Now, mission, and if we talk about mission to older people, lots of older people do mission in the terms of being good neighbours, bringing Christ in practical ways to their neighbours. I'm very much aware, and the report for the General Assembly had this really well documented, that society's changes mean that nowadays many of the people in my parish and others are living on their own with family, perhaps working in Berlin or Australia or New Zealand, etc. They're well dispersed, and even if they've got a family, they're on their own and they're dependent on friends and neighbours, and the church is really well placed to support them there. Folks also who have no family at all find the church as a family, and so if it's dementia or memory loss or other frailty that prevents them living full lives, then there's a burden upon the church and a mission, a specific mission and a growing mission to support these folks in relationship with the care agencies and of course the social services. So it's a growing area for us, but it's an area which is part of our life. It's not something separate. Mission for us is just being Christ's agents to our neighbours and enabling them to live in as good, you said, connections and communications are so vital. We've got a whole raft of things we can perhaps come to as parish churches we do to engage and support and fulfil that mission. But if I can say again, it's a growing area. We've discussed this often together as to what we might do in the community for people who are more and more isolated, whether they've got families or not.
Thinking of where you come from this morning, What does you as a parish minister, what do others in their role distinctly offer so that people would look to you in terms of mission and older people?
Oh, where do you start? Really, as a local parish church, we are seeking to be the body of Christ. And if our folks who are there on Sundays and during the week are engaged in the Christian faith, they naturally want to share their faith and care for their neighbour. And so, in many ways, there's a multiplicity of ways in which a local church is networking and supporting vulnerable older people, if I can put it that way, in our community, as well as older people doing the mission, as you've described. They're good friends, good neighbours, naturally, but there are also, apart from the natural, generic, faith-sharing, caring, compassion, in our church we have a number of practical organisational aspects. There's the traditional church elder who visits, who's there. We've got pastoral team who visits in between time, and many churches have got these. We've got a midweek service for older folks. There's fellowship there. There's all sorts of, there's a minibus that goes around and picks people up. There's the services that people will do and go to in Williamwood House and the local hospitals. There's an incredible network there. If someone is ill or there's some problems, there's a care and share organisation that will take out soup and meals, etc. So there's practical care. Apart from that, in the church, there's folks who work with, can I say WRVS or RVS now? There's of Give of Their Time. There's folks who do Meals on Wheels still. There's folks who work in a very professional and voluntary aspect. It's very difficult to nail down any one particular area. The parish church, and I'm sure my friends would agree, that as Christians we are caring as a body of Christ in a whole myriad of ways. But our people, if I can speak for our congregation, and we've discussed this often, they want to do more to help the vulnerable, and they need a wee bit more confidence, as you said, Maureen, and a wee bit more support and perhaps more resources just to have that confidence to do a bit more. There's a lot of desire out there to assist, and we've discussed this frequently, and Neil's still to come to the congregation and speak to them about this. So, yes, lots and lots of things going on, and I'm sure typical parish church, many would be similar, and I think resources to do a bit more to help folks in a structural way. But there's lots, I'm sure you've got the same,
Sure.
Lots of things we do for the vulnerable groups. But if I can just finish with this again, that if it wasn't for those who are elderly, we wouldn't have the network of care that we have, because the older people understand the issues so much more, I think, than the younger generation do, who are so wrapped up in the young families and so wrapped up in careers. It's not possible to give the practical care that the church can fill that gap a bit. So, an exciting time. I think there's challenges there for us, but a lot of good heart.
What support do you look to from others to help you to be part of mission and older people?
There's a lot of goodwill and eagerness to help folks living with dementia. If I can come to that specifically, there's a vast number and growing problem in our community where we cannot really care for the people with dementia. People on their own, people with families, carers are really being crushed. And so for our congregation, looking to find not just a drop-in centre, not just a coffee place to come to, but a real guidance and support as to how to set up a dementia support unit in the church. Now, a number of my neighbours have done this. I think Kings Park have done so, up in Newton Mearns as well. Mearns Kirk have done these sort of things, and I think there's a place for us as a church maybe to give some sort of guidance and guidelines to enable congregations to have the confidence to start a sort of drop-in centre, a support group, not just for tea and coffee, but memory clinics, perhaps people with expertise who will come along. And we've been trying to get this off the ground, and just a wee bit of help for congregations like ours who are really keen to do this, but give them a wee bit of professional care and support and direction.
What is the one message, perhaps out of what we've said, or you've just been saying, I've really been wanting to say this for an awful long time, that you would like to say?
A resource pack that congregations could set up a local dementia support unit.